Hello and welcome back to another podcast episode. Today, it's the word that strikes fear into every entrepreneur, and that is the word audit. But it's a little bit different because today we're talking about commercial real estate lease audits, a topic that's new to many. And to kind of kick this off, I'm going to turn it over to Spencer.
Yeah, so thanks, Sam. We have here our guest, Michael Hetchkop. Michael is a principal at A.CRE, and he is a lease forensics and enforcement professional. And to Sam's point, that sounds scary. But as we talk through it with Michael and understanding what he does on a day-to-day basis, I actually find it incredibly valuable, both to the tenant. So if you're representing a tenant or you say you're a leasing agent, what Michael does is incredibly valuable. I also think there's an opportunity for what Michael does to help real estate owners, or in particular, real estate investors. So Michael, great to have you. Maybe to start, why don't you give just the audience a bit of background about you and how you got into this niche of commercial real estate?
Great. Thank you for inviting me. This is very exciting, and I'm looking forward to talking about my very exciting topic. I will just tell you right off the bat, the reason that I call it lease forensics and enforcement is because I thought that sounded a lot better than audit, which is the word you mentioned earlier. And in fact, audit is not really what happens in this realm, but I'll explain more about that later. I started doing this over 30 years ago. Been on the tenant side. You know, as you know, A.CRE is a commercial real estate company that represents occupiers. So we thought it was a good idea that after negotiating leases for 6, 8, 9 months, that we make sure they're being administered properly. My background is I'm a CPA, I'm an MBA. I'm also a professor at Georgetown University in the Masters of Real Estate program, surprisingly teaching a class on leases. So I talk to students about this all the time.
So help the audience understand what a lease audit is, from the context of both you referred to as an occupier, we think of as our tenant, right, and the owner. Describe the process, if you will, for the audience.
A lease audit is really a thorough examination of the lease after it's been done and any other associated financial transactions that happen after that. Typically a tenant receives one of these reconciliation bills for the previous year, either 3 months, 6 months, 9 months after the lease has been in effect. These bills are very cryptic, okay? So it's very hard to understand. And what most tenants do is they look at the bill, they see the math works, and they pay it. And in some cases, that's really not the right thing to do because you really need to do more due diligence on it. So my team goes back to the landlord and says, how did you calculate this? What are the line items that you're including to come up with this bill? And a lot of times when I talk to the property manager and ask them about this and tell them what I need, they say, well, this is surprising. No other tenant has asked. I kind of like that in a way, but I don't think that's good. So we all know that leases are long documents. They're very subjective, okay? There's what we do is in our process, and I think this is where we set ourselves a little bit apart, is we concentrate on the lease first. It's easy to go to the numbers and say this increased 8%, 10%, whatever it is. But you really need to understand what the lease says and before you go into the numbers. So I spend hours, I may read a lease 2-3 times. I read well over probably 100 to 150 a year. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people don't like to do what I do, just to put that in there. Anyway, so, we go through that process. We do trend analyses, and really, it's not really rocket science. It's really taking the couple of years operating expenses and trending them and seeing where they've gone. We've had challenges, of course, with the pandemic, for sure. 2020, a lot of operating expenses were less because of less occupancy. Now we're seeing some of them increase, over time. So, we want to make sure that the ones that are increasing make sense to us. We want to make sure that the landlord is doing the things that the lease says they should be doing. Okay, and unfortunately, in the history of me doing this, is that we have found lots of mistakes. And a lot of mistakes happen, as you can imagine. Think of the environment we're dealing in right now. Buildings are, potentially going back, or buildings are getting sold at massive discounts. Um, so so the property management company changes, the philosophy of how they do the pass through changes, the accounting system changes. So we have to go through all of that, make sure there's, as an accountant, I'm looking for things to be, you know, done correctly and consistently over time. So that's a lot of the process. And, it takes us literally a very long time because we're going back to property managers and accountants to get the backup data. Sometimes it may be an invoice or a general ledger. But most of the time we're able to, with my experience, we're able to tell where are the items that we think are potential errors right off the bat.
So, Michael, for those in our audience that may not know, why don't you give a little walkthrough of what the typical pass-through provisions are in a lease? Like, what expenses are you typically seeing that tenants are paying?
Okay.
Or are obligated to pay?
Okay. Now, so in a lease, and if I get too granular, stop me. But in a lease, if and you've done a number of them, that a lease says what's the addition, what's the rent, okay, and that's pretty self-explanatory. There's usually a base rent chart, and we go from there, and I recalculate it anyway. Then we go to this additional rent paragraph. And the additional rent paragraph says this is what the landlord is allowed to charge. Things like salaries, utilities, security, real estate, But then we go to the next paragraph that says the landlord is not allowed to charge the following. Okay? And these are things like depreciation of the building. One of the biggest gray areas that we're constantly working on are capital expenses. Okay. Now, in a typical lease, an inclusion for capital expenses is allowed if it reduces the operating expenses of the building or required by government regulations. Now, the exclusions will say capital expenses are to be excluded, except for those that I just discussed. So we typically find a lot of capital items that we debate are not those that should be on the tenant side of the ledger. So that's one big one that happens. Okay, and we wind up, and then even if it should be on the tenant side of the ledger, we come to that conclusion. We want it to be amortized over a period of time. They shouldn't be charging it all in 1 year. I have lists of anywhere from 28 to 62 exclusions. Okay, I mean we don't want political contributions in there. I mean that you can imagine.
So for those listening, it's anywhere between a full service gross lease to an absolute triple net lease. So full
Correct.
service gross lease is the landlord's paying everything and anything to an absolute triple net to where the tenant's paying everything and anything.
Exactly. But we always wind up, you have to read the lease because there's always exceptions. Everybody calls a full service lease, some people call it a gross lease. Some people call it a full service lease, but it's really full service net of electric. So the terminology changes so much, between leases, landlords, and locations. That's why we have to read these things carefully to see, what should be. I mean, you just mentioned a great thing, full service to triple net. I just reviewed a pass-through where the tenant has a full service lease, but the landlord charged it as a triple net. Now, I don't want to get into all the specifics, but what happened was the landlord originally came through, said, you owe $180,000. I said, time out. It's a full service lease, which has a base year. This is probably for another discussion, and I know I'm getting too granular, but they said, oh, you're right. So we took that, it's actually $118,000, and the landlord said, oh, you're right, it's only $29,000. So, there's a lot of things that go on in the leases, and we just have to, that's why reading them and spending the time to read them carefully will allow you to go into the numbers and say, what do I think I'm going to find that could potentially be an error?
This is a really important point, because we use we use shorthand in the industry all the time to say, oh, it's a gross lease, oh, it's a triple net lease, oh, it's absolute triple net, oh, it's a double net, oh, it's a single net, right? Yeah. And then everyone has this assumption around what that shorthand means. What Michael does is you don't think in terms of, I mean, you may have that shorthand. You think in terms of, this is a spectrum, and there's so much nuance in the spectrum. And your job is to dig into a 160-page document and pull out that nuance. And what I'm hearing from you is landlords often get it wrong, or tenants often get it wrong.
Right.
And your job is to get it right. Let me ask you this. Someone drops a 160-page PDF in your inbox. How do you even start? Like, what's the process for doing this? I mean, are you going page by page? Do you have like a checklist for things you look at? Like, what is that like, Michael?
Well, I do have a checklist, but believe it or not, I do go page by page, because, the sad thing about leases is they're not standard. So a lease that was done by owner A may look entirely different from owner B. And, it's not like, it would be great if section 1 was base rent, section 2 was additional rent, section 3 was this, section 4, section 5. But you just don't find that. Section 1 is this in one lease, and then it's section 7 in another. And then the best part about it is I may go through the first 140 pages and go, I'm missing all of this. And then all of a sudden I get all these amendments or additions, to the lease that say, rider 1, rider 2, and it further explains these things. Like, it'll go into definitions, and then it'll go into more information. So so I go through the 160 page. I mean, last year I actually had to go through a 600 page lease, but I was lucky. 300 pages was drawings. But 300 pages was content. So that was the better part of a week, trying to go through that.
So I would imagine, and you correct me if I'm wrong, I would imagine your service is most valuable to larger tenants, right? With big reimbursements, and they're looking to pay someone with your level of expertise to use a fine tooth comb to go through a lease. Imagine you are the owner of a nail salon with a lease that your lease is $2,000 a month, and you have $300 to $400 in triple nets a month. What is some advice you could give to those small tenants? Maybe it's what are things to look out for, or how could they do a lease audit on their own?
Right. Well, for a 2,000 square foot retail tenant, I'm going to want them to do a lease audit on their own. No, but and I will tell you, I have done retail in the past. I will. The hard part about retail specifically today is a lot of times my first question to the retail tenant, I'm getting a little off, is, have you paid your rent? Are you in default? No, I haven't paid anything in 6 months. So now I'm already starting with, the landlord's not going to be very happy to hear from me. Okay, but anyway, I'm gonna talk to them that they should, get a line item breakdown. A lot of retail tenants complain about things like the parking lot, the paving, and then they complain about snow removal. Those are the kind of things that they complain about. But then they have to go back to their lease and see that the lease says that this is what they are supposed to be paying for, and they'll pay for their proportionate share. So what they should do is they should look at their lease, and I like to have people abstract them, so you can pull out the important parts. And then when you get those bills from the landlord, which I'm telling you are going to be cryptic, you say to them, hey, why are you charging me $1,000 a month? And then also for retail tenants, like you said, there'll be these marketing fees and other things that come into that are a calculation. I was working with some tenants in a mall last year, and they had some, big tenants. I don't remember whether it was a Kohl's or something like that. And I asked the landlord, well, how do you apportion real estate taxes? And the landlord came back, and after asking this, so many times, I said, "Can you send me a schedule?" They said, "We got to go to New York. We got to figure this out. We'll get back to you." After a while, they said, "Nobody really knows." So I said, "That's encouraging." And I'm from New York, so I can understand why that's true. But,
just really quick.
Sure.
Call that a success story. But what's an example of a success story that you've seen in your career?
Okay. This was a 150,000 square foot tenant about 2 years ago. And we're talking again, I'm not getting into the specifics. I'm assuming that maybe the people out there will know full service versus triple net and all sorts of things. But in full service, you have this base year that's established in your first year of occupancy. And essentially, you pay a proportionate share of operating expenses the second year over the first, the third over the first, the fourth, and everything. That first year remains stable. Now, if that first year is not properly calculated, let's say it's lower than it should be, and this was the case for this tenant, the landlord, for some reason, in the subsequent year, had, let's say, 20 categories for operating expenses. I went back to the base year, and there were 15. And I went, wait. Maybe there's a grouping issue here. Maybe it's the accounting. But then we went back and looked at the base year, and for some reason, there was no line item for insurance. There was no line item for engineering. There was 3 or 4 line items were just missing. So I went back, and it took about 3 or 4 months, believe it or not, went back to the landlord about this. They said, "We made a mistake. We didn't put these numbers in the base year. Here's what it should be." The savings was over $1 million.
Wow.
Yeah, it was
Wow.
really, it was really substantial. I mean, it was just, this is why, doing those trends, which I say is not really rocket science, but putting those together really gives you insight into, hey, what's missing or what's going on that shouldn't be.
Michael, when do tenants usually get you involved in the process? I know there's a point when they should get you involved, but when do they typically show up to you? What sparks that moment in time typically, or a couple scenarios? I'm curious to hear.
I just want to get back to one thing you said earlier. Little tenants, I'd certainly rather do the bigger tenants and get the $1 million. Okay, sure, but we do a fair number of nonprofits here in DC, and I will tell you, I may save a nonprofit $2,000. We have there's one group here that I forget what they're called, but it's a group that represents candy manufacturers, and I saved them a couple of grand. So the next day, I got this huge box of chocolates. I mean, so they like it. They like it. Just as much.
Yeah.
But as far as getting me involved, tenants that I've been dealing with for many, many years at this point in time get this bill, and they just forward the email straight from the landlord to me. Can you tell me if this is correct? So a lot of tenants, it's good for them to get me involved pretty close to when they get the bill. And that just goes to another thing in the lease that, there's this great paragraph called audit rights. And audit rights stipulate that the tenant needs to, say that they want to audit or review within a certain period of time. Most landlords today will put in 30 days. That's certainly not enough time. We know how fast 30 days can go. I like 180. We'll get back. Maybe 90 is where we'll decide. So you really need to know your audit rights. You need to know. So everybody wants to get back to me, hopefully within that window. Now, we don't necessarily complete it within that window a lot of times because we're talking to the landlord and they have to go, the property manager has to go to the property accountant, to the asset manager, to the owner, so things just get, go over time. But since we've started it, we're in that, we can work after that frame of time. But tenants should get involved, quickly after that bill comes in, because also the landlord has just put it together and it's easier for us to go back and say, what's going on here. But, you make a good point there, Michael, that I've gotten bills 2, 3, 4 years later. And so then I got to go back to the statute of limitations, and I got to go back to ownership, and it's a mess.
So to what degree can the tenant push back on perhaps reimbursements they paid years in the past. I mean, is that common? Is that possible?
It's possible. If the landlord hasn't billed for a long period of time, yes, it's possible. If we look through subsequent billings and we find that the landlord didn't properly, and I don't want to bring this term up, gross ups, I don't want to get into that too much, hasn't grossed up the base year properly, we may be able to go back. In this case, a lot of that's going to depend on the size of the tenant. If the tenant has a lot of leverage, is a big tenant. Also, if the tenant's lease is going to expire soon, we may use that as a chip and say, hey, look, you know what? You've made a mistake over the last couple of years and we want our money. And the landlord may then say, well, why don't we just negotiate a slightly different concession package or do something so
it becomes more leverage in a negotiation than necessarily a fight over a bill from 3 years ago.
And what I want to do just quickly is I'm going to be gone after the tenant, after I finish. So I've been on the landlord side. That's how I pretty much know what I'm doing, because I've put these bills together and then I went from what people call the dark side to the better side. So it's just, I know how this is to be handled. And I also know that the tenant, like I said, the tenant's going to be there when I leave. So I want it to be done in a very nice, cordial fashion, so everybody is happy afterwards. And I don't, bang the desk or anything like that to get.
So from the landlord's perspective, what can the landlord learn from you? Either in terms of, certainly if there's errors that are in the tenant's favor, there are errors that are in the landlord's favor. What does the landlord, what does the landlord often miss? And I know when you're representing a tenant, it's not your job to tell the landlord that they didn't bill enough, right? I totally get that. So I'm not suggesting that. But I'm suggesting as you look through this, for the landlords that are listening, what are some areas that perhaps they're missing out?
Okay. That's funny you said, because I had a major landlord a couple of years ago say, would you come in and talk to my property managers and tell them what you find? I will tell you that I think that a lot of the errors, and this is for the landlord's sake, like you said, a lot of them are the fact that the property accountant who's entering the lease into the property management system is not trained sufficiently, okay? So when they're reading a lease, they're doing their best job to put the particulars of the lease into the accounting system. That's why I teach. I teach a lot of property managers and property accountants. And then they leave my class and go, oh, now I finally realize how that works. So if I were to give them advice, I would say, come to my class. No, I would say, make sure your property, go over leases with your property accountants. Go over various leases. Go over, if there's been a lease that's had an issue, sit down and discuss it with them so that that issue doesn't become an issue for other tenants. Because you find sometimes that if there's an issue for one, there's an issue for all of them. So I would say better training, okay? And I would also say, much like we did in the CPA realm, we did a lot of, additional, review and quality control. I would say that, landlords should make sure they're instituting the proper quality control. So when somebody does the bill, it just doesn't go out. Somebody else is reviewing it. Somebody else, getting a few levels of someone checking it off so that at the end of the day, they know the bill going out is correctly. So a lot more training in that aspect would be my advice.
So I'd love Michael Belasco, if it's okay, as we're finishing up here. I know we're low on time. There's two trends right now that are underway that I'd love Michael to get your perspective on. The first is office. I just came back from New York City, got back in last night, and it seemed like everyone was talking about how just structurally office use is changing. And there's a whole host of ramifications from the property tax base is going to change to how landlords and tenants think about offices. So I'd love to get your perspective on that. The second, unrelated, is around generative AI. And what I would love is to train a Gen AI model on your brain and have what an incredible thing. But let's start with first office. What's your perspective there?
Well, I talked earlier about this term called gross ups, that, even if the building is not fully occupied, the landlord in most leases is allowed to gross up the operating expenses if the building is really 95 or 100% occupied. So that should, if it's done properly, should kind of stabilize the expenses over time. But that's if done properly. And unfortunately, in many cases, it's not. Yes, I do think we're going to have to, watch what goes on. For a lot of tenants, one of the biggest problems I have with them is utilities. So, for office tenants, if you could, and this is really hard in a lot of buildings, I'd recommend everybody be separately metered, so they don't have to worry about the landlord. And we're just going to have to watch where the expenses go. I mean, expenses have gone up because of COVID, in buildings for HVAC and security and other things. And in New York in itself, I almost cringe when I have to do an audit because it's its own animal. And the leases are really long and usually omit a lot of things that I'd like to see. But we're gonna. I don't know what we're gonna see. Buildings that may have some residential in them versus office and things like that. I don't know how that's going to work yet, but we're going to have to keep an eye on that.
Well, Michael and I acquired once together Sherwin-Williams in Austin, Texas. That was a 2-page lease. And so that was a different set of complexity, where so much was left to what had traditionally been done and not ever in writing. Michael Hetchkop, thank you so much for joining us. Really fascinating. So to the audience, we'll put Michael's contact info in either the summary of the episode or in the blog post. What other ways, Michael, can people get a hold of you outside of email or your website?
No, they can call. I'm always willing to. Look, I enjoy doing this because even though I'm at this 30 years, things just constantly change. Yeah. And I love to hear from other tenants in the country, what's going on. I had a student that showed me a lease in Wisconsin where the tenant had to give the landlord a wheel of cheese every year. So I thought that was a little different. So it's just amazing what I see, and I just love to hear the story. So feel free to give me a call and see how I can help.
Yeah. You don't want to get in the rears on that cheese distribution. Well, this has been absolutely phenomenal. I'm sitting back and just learning a whole bunch. What we need are a couple of master lease templates for the listeners. That would be very useful. But thank you for your time today, Michael. And for the listeners, thank you for tuning in. I'm sure you've gotten a ton of value. This one might make sense to go over to adventuresincre.com. Check out the article associated with this podcast to see how to get in touch with Michael. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Adventures in CRE audio series. For show notes and additional resources, head over to www.adventuresincre.com/audio series.